My name is Helen Dawson, and the moment my son told the doctor to remove my name from the hospital forms was the moment my heart cracked in two. I was lying in a hospital bed after collapsing at home. My body felt weak, but my mind was completely clear. That's when I heard my son, Daniel, standing near the door talking to the doctor. "Doctor," he said calmly, "please remove my mother's name from the decision forms." The doctor sounded confused. "Remove her name? Why would we do that?" "Yes," Daniel replied firmly. "She won't be making any medical decisions anymore. I'll handle everything from now on." I felt a cold wave rush through my chest. Why would my own son say that? The doctor asked carefully, "Are you sure this is what she wants?" Daniel's voice hardened. "It's what I want. And it's what's best for her." At that moment, something deep inside me knew this wasn't just about hospital paperwork. Something bigger was happening. Something I didn't understand yet. And if the nurse hadn't walked into my room 10 minutes later holding a strange document from my file, I might never have learned the truth about my own son and what he was planning. 3 days earlier, my life had been perfectly normal. I was 72 years old and lived alone in a small house outside Springfield. My husband passed away 10 years ago from cancer, but I had always stayed strong and independent. My son Daniel visited sometimes. Not often, maybe once every few months. But it was enough for me to believe we were still close and that he cared about me. That Tuesday morning, I felt a sharp pain in my chest while watering my plants in the front garden. The next thing I remember was waking up in an ambulance with paramedics hovering over me. Bright lights. Loud sirens. Someone saying, "Stay with us. You're going to be okay." When I arrived at the hospital, doctors said my heart was weak but stable. They kept me overnight for observation and monitoring. Daniel arrived later that evening around 7 o'clock. At first, he looked genuinely concerned. He held my hand gently and said, "Mom, you scared me. I thought I'd lost you." But something about his eyes felt distant. Cold. Like he wasn't really there for me but for something else entirely. I ignored the feeling at the time. The next morning I woke up early around 6:30. The hallway outside my room was quiet except for the soft footsteps of nurses doing their rounds. But I heard voices near the nurses' station just beyond my door. One of them was Daniel. I recognized his voice immediately. "I just want to make sure everything is arranged properly," he said in a low tone. "Arranged?" What did he mean by that? The doctor replied, "Your mother is stable for now, Mr. Dawson." "For now?" Daniel asked. "But what about later? What happens if her condition gets worse?" "Yes. But at her age we must be very careful and prepared for any situation." There was a pause. Then Daniel asked something that made my stomach twist into knots. "What happens if she can't make decisions later? Who handles things then?" The doctor answered calmly. "Usually a close family member handles those decisions. That would be you since you're her only child." Daniel said softly, "That would be me." "Yes, I understand." Something about the way he said it didn't feel loving or concerned. It sounded calculated and planned. Like he had already thought about this scenario before. Later that afternoon a young nurse brought several papers into my room. "Mrs. Dawson," she said kindly with a warm smile, "these are hospital authorization forms. Standard procedure for all patients." She explained they allowed someone to make medical decisions on my behalf if I couldn't make them myself. "Most patients list a family member they trust," she added while handing me a pen. Naturally, I wrote Daniel Dawson without hesitation. He was my son. My only child. Who else would I trust with something so important? The nurse smiled and placed the papers carefully in my medical file on the desk. Daniel arrived shortly after the nurse left. When I told him I had added his name to the authorization forms, he nodded slowly. But again, that strange look crossed his face. Not gratitude. Not love or appreciation. Something colder. Almost like satisfaction or victory. "You did the right thing, Mom," he said while patting my hand. Then he quickly changed the subject to the weather and hospital food. At the time I thought he was just worried and uncomfortable in hospitals. But now I realize that moment meant more than I understood then. The following morning was when everything changed completely. I was resting quietly in bed, half asleep, when Daniel walked into the hallway with the doctor. I could hear their voices clearly carrying through the open door. They didn't know I was listening. Doctor, Daniel said, I need to update the paperwork my mother signed yesterday. The doctor sounded confused. Update it how, Mr. Dawson? I want my mother removed from the decision forms entirely. She shouldn't have any authority over her own medical care anymore. I froze in bed. Removed? But it was my name. My life. My decisions. The doctor asked, You mean you want to remove your name from the forms? No, Daniel replied very firmly. I mean remove her authority completely. I should be the only one making decisions about her care. My heart began pounding hard against my ribs. What authority was he talking about? Why would he do that without even asking me first? The doctor said carefully, That's quite unusual unless there's a legal reason or medical incapacity. Daniel paused for a moment. Then he said something that chilled my blood. I have documents that prove she shouldn't be making decisions anymore. A young nurse named Emma was standing nearby at the nurse's station. She had been caring for me since I arrived at the hospital 2 days ago. She was kind and attentive, always checking on me. And she heard the entire conversation between Daniel and the doctor. Later that morning she entered my room very slowly. She looked uneasy and troubled about something. Mrs. Dawson, she said gently while closing the door behind her, may I ask you something personal? Of course, dear, I replied, sitting up slightly in bed. She hesitated before speaking. Did you ask your son to change your hospital paperwork? Did you tell him to remove your authority over your own medical decisions? No, I said immediately, confused. Why would I do that? Her expression darkened with concern. I thought so. I thought that seemed strange. She glanced down at my medical file in her hands. There's something very strange in your documents, Mrs. Dawson. Something that doesn't make sense. My stomach tightened with fear. What do you mean? What's in there? Emma opened the file slowly and pulled out a single paper. This was added to your file early this morning before you woke up. She handed it to me carefully. My hands trembled as I stared at the paper Emma had given me. The title at the top read, Power of Medical Authority Transfer. It was an official-looking document with legal language. And underneath all the complicated words was my name typed clearly, Helen Dawson. But the signature at the bottom was not mine. Someone had signed my name, but I knew immediately it wasn't my handwriting. The letters were too slanted. The curves were wrong. Everything about it looked fake. Emma, I whispered with a shaking voice, I didn't sign this document. This isn't my signature. She nodded slowly and seriously. I suspected that, Mrs. Dawson. That's why I brought it to you. The document claimed I had transferred all medical decision power to Daniel effective immediately. It also stated I was no longer mentally capable of managing my own affairs or making sound medical judgments. That part shocked me the most and made me angry. Mentally incapable. I said aloud. I've been talking, reading, answering questions all morning. There's nothing wrong with my mind at all. Emma leaned closer and spoke quietly. This form was placed in your file at exactly 6:30 this morning according to our computer system. I remembered something important then. I thought back carefully to earlier that morning. Daniel had arrived at the hospital around 6:15. I remember hearing his voice in the hallway very early before most visitors were even allowed inside. The visiting hours didn't start until 7, but somehow he had gotten in early. My heart sank like a stone. Are you saying my son did this, Emma? Are you saying Daniel forged my signature? Emma didn't answer directly, but her silence and the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She was thinking the same thing I was thinking. Emma, I said quietly, why would my own son do something like this? She closed the door completely and sat down in the chair beside my bed. I shouldn't say this, she whispered carefully, but something about your son has worried me since he arrived. My chest tightened with anxiety. What do you mean? She glanced at the hallway nervously before continuing. This morning before you woke up, he asked the doctor several very specific questions about life support decisions and end-of-life care. Life support? Why would Daniel ask about that? I wasn't dying. My heart was weak but stable. There was no reason to discuss life support. Emma continued even more carefully now. He also asked the doctor what happens to a patient's property and finances if they pass away without updating their legal forms, Emma said softly. He wanted to know about inheritance and estate procedures. A cold feeling spread through my entire body like ice water in my veins. Daniel had never cared about my house or money before this. At least, that's what I had always believed. He had his own job and his own life. But suddenly a terrible thought appeared in my mind like a dark shadow. Could he be planning something? Could my own son be trying to take control of my life for money? Emma squeezed my hand gently. I don't want to accuse anyone without solid proof, Mrs. Dawson. But if this signature isn't yours, then someone committed a serious crime. Forgery, I whispered. Yes. And fraud. And possibly worse if they plan to use this document to make decisions about your medical care without your knowledge or permission. We both understood what she meant without saying it directly. Someone had forged a document inside my hospital file. And the person who would benefit the most from having medical authority over me was my own son Daniel. The son I had raised and loved and trusted completely. But why would he do this? As I lay in bed thinking about everything, old memories began coming back to me. Small things I had ignored or dismissed over the years. Little warning signs I should have paid attention to. I remembered Daniel asking about my house value about 6 months ago. Mom, do you know how much this place is worth now? He had asked casually during a visit. Property values have gone up a lot in this area. At the time I thought he was just making conversation. Now it felt different. Now it felt like he was calculating something. I remembered him asking about my will and estate plans last year. Have you updated your will recently, Mom? You should make sure everything is in order. He had seemed so concerned and responsible then. I also remembered Daniel suggesting multiple times that I should move into a retirement home. You're getting older, Mom. It might be safer. You could sell this house and use the money for a nice assisted living facility. I had always refused. I loved my home. I loved my independence. But now I wondered if he had other reasons for wanting me to sell. At the time I thought he was just worried about me living alone. But now those conversations felt completely different. That afternoon the doctor entered my room with a serious expression on his face. His name was Dr. Patterson, and he had been kind to me since I arrived. But now he looked troubled and concerned about something important. Mrs. Dawson, he said carefully while closing the door, there's some confusion about your medical authority forms. I need to ask you some questions. I held up the paper Emma had shown me earlier. Do you mean this document, Doctor? His eyes widened with surprise. Where did you get that? That should be in your file. It was in my file. A nurse showed it to me because she thought something was wrong with it. He took the paper from my hands and studied the signature at the bottom very carefully. Then he looked directly at me with serious eyes. Mrs. Dawson, did you sign this document? No, I answered firmly and clearly. That is not my signature. Someone forged it. The doctor frowned deeply. That's very concerning. This is a serious matter. He explained that legal documents inside a medical file must be properly verified and witnessed. If this document was fake, it could be considered fraud and forgery. Both were serious crimes that could result in criminal charges. My heart pounded. Doctor, did my son Daniel give you this form? He hesitated before answering. Then slowly he nodded. Yes, he did. That answer hurt worse than any physical pain I had ever felt. Worse than the heart condition that brought me to this hospital. Because it confirmed what I feared most. Daniel had brought that forged document himself. He had placed it in my medical file. And he had claimed it was real and legitimate. My own son had tried to steal my medical authority through forgery and deception. Why would he do this? I asked the doctor, though I wasn't really expecting an answer. Dr. Patterson sat down in the chair beside my bed. Mrs. Dawson, I don't know your son's motivations. But I can tell you that what he did is illegal and extremely serious. He paused before continuing. If someone gains medical authority over a patient through fraudulent documents, they can make life and death decisions. They can authorize treatments or refuse treatments. They can access financial information related to medical care. The full weight of what Daniel had attempted began to sink in. This wasn't just about paperwork. This was about control. Complete control over my life, my health, and possibly my money and property. What happens now? I asked quietly. Dr. Patterson's next words surprised me and gave me hope. Don't worry, Mrs. Dawson. We're going to investigate this thoroughly. The hospital takes document fraud very seriously. And what they discovered next would shock everyone. Before I continue, if you believe justice should always be served, please take a moment to like and subscribe to this channel. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below telling me your location. Now let me tell you what happened next, because it gets even more intense. After Dr. Patterson left my room, I could feel a strange tension building in the hallway outside. Something had changed in the atmosphere of the hospital. For the first time since I arrived, the staff were not just treating me as an ordinary patient. They were watching everything closely. Watching my room. Watching my visitors. Watching Daniel. Emma returned about 20 minutes later with a very serious expression on her face. Mrs. Dawson, she said quietly while glancing at the hallway, the hospital administrator is personally reviewing the document now. This has become an official investigation. I nodded slowly, still processing everything. Part of me desperately hoped this was all just a terrible misunderstanding. Maybe Daniel had made an honest mistake somehow. Maybe someone else had placed that paper in my file. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation that would make sense. But deep down in my heart, I already knew the truth. And the truth was painful and frightening. About 30 minutes later, I heard Daniel's voice in the hallway again. But this time he sounded different. Daniel's voice was irritated and defensive now. I already explained everything to you people, he said loudly. My mother signed that form several weeks ago at home. She asked me to bring it to the hospital. Another voice answered calmly and professionally. It was a woman's voice I didn't recognize. Sir, we simply need to verify the document's authenticity. This is standard procedure. Daniel replied sharply, why? I'm her son. I'm handling her medical care now. That's what the document says. I felt my chest tighten with emotion. Handling my care? He was talking about me like I was an object or a problem to be managed, not a person with rights and feelings. Emma squeezed my hand gently. Don't worry, Mrs. Dawson, she whispered softly. But I have to be honest with you. If that signature is proven to be fake, this could become a very serious criminal situation. Criminal? I repeated quietly. Yes. Forgery of medical documents is a felony. And if someone uses forged documents to gain control over another person's medical care, that's fraud and possibly even attempted exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The words hit me hard. Vulnerable adult. Is that what I was now? And at that exact moment, I realized something that made my stomach turn. My son was starting to panic. A short time later, Daniel walked into my room. He looked completely different from the concerned son who had visited me 2 days ago. His face was tense and flushed. His jaw was tight. He looked almost angry, which confused and frightened me. Mom, he said quickly without even greeting me properly, there's been a small misunderstanding with the hospital paperwork. Nothing to worry about. I looked at him carefully, studying his face. What misunderstanding, Daniel? He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You signed a medical authority form last month when I visited you, remember? I brought it to the hospital for you. I shook my head slowly. No, Daniel. I didn't sign anything like that. I would remember. For a moment his face froze completely. His fake smile disappeared. Then he tried a different approach, speaking more softly now. Mom, you must have forgotten. You've been under a lot of stress lately. Sometimes memory gets fuzzy. I'm 72 years old, I replied calmly but firmly, not confused. My memory is perfectly fine. The air in the room turned cold and uncomfortable. Daniel crossed his arms defensively across his chest. Well, the document clearly has your signature on it, Mom. It's right there in black and white. I reached over to the bedside table and picked up the paper Emma had shown me earlier. I held it up. This document? I asked, holding the paper between us. Daniel's eyes flickered nervously when he saw it. Just for a split second. But it was enough. I saw the flash of panic cross his face before he controlled it. Daniel, I asked quietly but directly, did you forge my signature on this paper? His voice suddenly rose defensively. Why would you accuse me of something like that? I'm your son. I'm trying to help you. I didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was already sitting between us on that hospital bed like an invisible wall. And the look in his eyes told me he knew I didn't believe him anymore. The trust between mother and son had been broken. "Help me," I finally said. "By taking away my right to make my own medical decisions? By claiming I'm mentally incapable when I'm perfectly fine?" Daniel's face turned red. "You don't understand the situation, Mom. You're sick. You collapsed. Someone needs to make responsible decisions for you." "I can make my own decisions," I said firmly. "Can you?" he shot back. "Because right now you're accusing your own son of forgery. That doesn't sound very rational to me." The cruelty of those words stung. He was trying to manipulate me. Trying to make me doubt myself and my own judgment. Before Daniel could say anything else, there was a firm knock on the door. A tall, professional-looking woman in a business suit entered the room. She carried a leather folder and had an air of authority about her. "Good afternoon," she said politely but seriously. "I'm Ms. Alvarez, the hospital administrator. I'm here to discuss the medical authorization document in question." Daniel immediately straightened up and changed his tone completely. "Finally," he said with forced friendliness. "Maybe you can help resolve this silly confusion. Can we clear this up now?" Ms. Alvarez nodded politely but her expression remained serious. "That's exactly why I'm here, Mr. Dawson." She placed her leather folder on the table beside my bed and opened it carefully. "We have thoroughly reviewed the document you submitted to the hospital this morning," she continued in a calm, professional voice. Daniel looked confident again, almost smug. "Good. Then you can see it's legitimate." But Ms. Alvarez continued speaking as if he hadn't interrupted. "We also compared the signature on that document with several verified signatures from Mrs. Dawson's previous medical records that we have on file." The room became completely silent. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Daniel's confident smile began to fade slowly like ice melting. "And?" Daniel asked, trying to sound casual but his voice betrayed his nervousness. Ms. Alvarez spoke carefully and clearly. "The signatures do not match, Mr. Dawson." I watched my son's face drain of all color. He looked like he might be sick. "According to our handwriting analysis," Ms. Alvarez continued, "the signature on the medical authority transfer document appears to be forged. It was not written by Mrs. Dawson." For several long seconds, nobody in the room spoke. The silence was thick and heavy. Then Daniel suddenly laughed, but it sounded forced and nervous. "That's ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous." Ms. Alvarez didn't react to his outburst. She remained perfectly calm and professional. "Sir, I need to inform you that submitting a forged legal document to a hospital is a very serious criminal matter." Daniel's voice became sharp and defensive. "So what exactly are you accusing me of?" Ms. Alvarez answered in the same calm tone. "We're not accusing you of anything yet, Mr. Dawson. We're simply asking you to explain where this document came from and how you obtained it." Daniel opened his mouth to respond but nothing came out. For the first time since this whole situation began, my son didn't have an answer ready. He just stood there looking trapped and desperate. And I realized he had been caught in his own lie. Daniel tried desperately to stay calm and in control. "This is insane," he said, shaking his head. "My mother signed that document several weeks ago at her house. I witnessed it myself." Ms. Alvarez looked at me with kind eyes. "Mrs. Dawson, did you ever sign a medical transfer form outside this hospital in recent weeks?" "No," I answered clearly. "Never." Daniel suddenly raised his voice at me. "Mom, why are you doing this? Why are you lying?" "Doing this? Lying?" The accusation felt like a slap across my face. "I'm telling the truth, Daniel," I said quietly but firmly. He shook his head in frustration. "You must have forgotten, Mom. You're confused. The medication they're giving you is affecting your memory." Ms. Alvarez gently interrupted. "Mr. Dawson, the handwriting analysis is quite clear and conclusive. The signature does not match." Daniel's breathing became heavy and labored. "Fine," he said suddenly, changing his approach again. "Maybe the signature looks slightly different because she was tired when she signed it. But the form is still valid and legal." "Actually," Ms. Alvarez replied calmly, "without a verified and authentic signature, the document has no legal validity whatsoever." The tension in the room grew even thicker. Then Ms. Alvarez added something that shocked Daniel completely and made his face go white. We also checked the metadata and timestamp on the document printer, Ms. Alvarez said while looking at her notes. Daniel blinked rapidly. What does that have to do with anything? It shows that this form was printed here at this hospital using our administrative printer in room 2B, she explained. And according to our security logs, it was printed this morning at 6:22 a.m. Right before Daniel arrived at my room. Right before visiting hours even started. The timeline was becoming crystal clear. So, Daniel said defensively, maybe I printed a copy of the original document to give to the hospital. Ms. Alvarez opened her folder and pulled out another paper. We also reviewed the security camera footage from the administrative hallway. Daniel's eyes widened. He hadn't expected that. The footage shows you entering the printer room at 6:18 a.m. this morning. You were alone. You used the printer. And then you were seen on camera placing a document into the medical files cabinet. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Daniel had been caught on camera committing forgery and fraud. That doesn't prove anything, Daniel said weakly, but his voice had lost all confidence. Ms. Alvarez closed her folder. Mr. Dawson, I'm going to ask you one more time. Where did this document really come from? And suddenly, my son's entire story began falling apart completely. Daniel's confidence was completely gone now. He looked desperately at the floor, then at the door, then at the window. Like he was searching frantically for a way to escape this situation he had created. This whole thing is being blown out of proportion, he muttered quietly. I was just trying to help my mother. But Ms. Alvarez remained firm and professional. Sir, hospital security officers will need to speak with you about this situation. This is now an official investigation. That single word hit the room like a bomb. Investigation. This wasn't just a family disagreement anymore. This was potentially criminal. Daniel turned to face me directly. His eyes were pleading now. Mom, you're really going to let them do this to me? Your own son? My chest hurt terribly. But not from my heart condition. From the deep betrayal and sadness of this moment. I didn't ask them to investigate you, Daniel, I said softly. You caused this situation yourself. He stared at me for a long, painful moment. Then something dark and ugly appeared in his eyes. Something I had never seen before in my own child. You don't understand what you're doing, he whispered, and his voice sounded almost threatening. What don't I understand? I asked, feeling afraid now. His jaw tightened. You were supposed to just trust me, Mom. You were supposed to cooperate. The way Daniel said those words sent a genuine chill down my spine. You were supposed to just trust me. Not because he deserved trust. Not because he had earned it. But because it would have made his plan easier. It didn't sound like the words of a concerned son. It sounded like frustration that his carefully planned scheme had failed. And suddenly I found myself wondering something absolutely terrifying. If Emma the nurse hadn't found that forged document in my file, how far would Daniel have actually gone? What decisions would he have made about my medical care? About my life? About my property and money? Would he have authorized treatments I didn't want? Would he have refused treatments I needed? Would he have made decisions that benefited him financially rather than decisions that were best for my health? The thoughts made me feel sick to my stomach. Security officers arrived at my room a few minutes later. They were professional and polite but serious. They spoke quietly with Ms. Alvarez in the hallway while Daniel stood silently by the window, no longer trying to defend himself. Finally, one of the security officers entered and spoke to Daniel. Sir, we need you to come with us to answer some questions about the document in question. Daniel didn't argue. He simply nodded and started walking toward the door like a defeated man. Before leaving the room, Daniel stopped and turned back toward me one final time. Our eyes met across the hospital room. Mom, he said quietly, and his voice had changed again. Now it sounded almost desperate and pleading. This doesn't have to become a huge problem for both of us. What do you mean? I asked carefully. If you just confirm that you signed the form, everything ends here. No investigation. No police. No criminal charges. Everything goes back to normal. I stared at him in complete disbelief. Even now, even after being caught with clear evidence, he was asking me to lie for him. asking me to commit perjury to save him from the consequences of his own criminal actions. You want me to lie? I asked. It's not lying, Mom, he said quickly. It's just simplifying things. It's just fixing a small misunderstanding before it gets out of hand. My heart broke into even smaller pieces. Why would you do this, Daniel? Why would you forge documents and try to take control of my life? For a moment he didn't answer. He just looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then he said something that shocked me more than anything else that day. You don't understand how much pressure I'm under, Mom. How much I owe. How desperate I am. The word hung in the air between us. Desperate. You're in financial trouble? I asked quietly. Daniel laughed, but it was a bitter, harsh sound without any humor. Financial trouble? That's putting it mildly, Mom. I'm drowning. How much do you owe? I asked. He hesitated, looking ashamed for the first time. Then he spoke quietly. $300,000. My breath caught in my throat. I could barely process that number. 300,000? How is that even possible? I invested everything in a business partnership, he explained, and his voice sounded tired and defeated now. My friend convinced me it was a sure thing. We were going to make millions. I even took out loans against my house and my car. I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of his confession. The business failed 6 months ago, Daniel continued. Completely collapsed. My friend disappeared. And now the creditors are coming after me for everything. They're going to take my house, Mom. They're going to take everything I own. Suddenly all the pieces started coming together in a horrible way. The questions about my house value. The suggestions that I sell my property. The forged medical documents. It all made terrible, painful sense now. If you had medical authority over me, I said slowly, understanding the full scope of his plan, you could manage my financial assets. Daniel didn't deny it. He just looked at the floor. I was going to protect your money, Mom. I wasn't going to steal it. I just needed to use it temporarily until I got back on my feet. My assets, I said quietly. My house that I've lived in for 40 years. My savings that your father and I worked our entire lives to build. You were going to take control of all of it. I was going to protect it, he insisted weakly. And pay you back eventually. By forging legal documents? I asked. By claiming I was mentally incapable of making my own decisions. He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. The security officer stepped forward. Sir, we really need you to come with us now. Daniel nodded and started walking out. But at the doorway, he turned back one last time. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered. And for just a moment, I saw a flash of the little boy I used to know. The child I had raised and loved. But that child was gone now, replaced by a desperate man who had made terrible choices. After Daniel left with security, Emma sat down beside my hospital bed. I'm so sorry you had to go through this, Mrs. Dawson, she said gently, holding my hand. I nodded, feeling emotionally exhausted. But strangely, something inside me also felt lighter. Clearer. For years I had ignored small warning signs about Daniel's character and his priorities. Now the truth was completely exposed. It was painful and heartbreaking. But it was also undeniably clear. And sometimes painful truth is better than comfortable lies. Sometimes clarity, no matter how much it hurts, is the first essential step toward real healing and freedom. And in that moment, despite everything, I felt grateful that Emma had found that document. Because the truth had saved me from something far worse than a broken heart. It had saved me from losing everything my husband and I had built together over our entire lives.